I remember definitely knowing from the time I started going to school that I was different from the rest of my peers.
Some people have said with SM, well, does it transfer to something else? And the answer is no.
I went to college, studied psychology, and for my senior capstone project, I decided to give it on selective mutism in the classroom.
Welcome back to another episode of the Unspoken Words Podcast, a selective mutism podcast hosted by the Smart Center, produced and published by New Edition Productions. This episode features our latest installment of our popular Shining Stars series, where Dr. E sits down with former Smart Center patients or their parents and discusses with them how they overcame selective mutism. Today, we meet former Smart Center patient Alex Collins. Like our last Shining Stars episode, episode 45 with Nick Jones, many of you already know Alex. She has been a recurring presence at Smart Center COMMUNICAMPs, both as a head counselor as well as a panelist. And she was also the host of this podcast, Unspoken Words, way back in 2023 when we first started putting out episodes. So needless to say, we're really excited to have her back on the podcast and have her share her story with all of you. Alex's battle with selective mutism began when she was just 3 years old, when her mom first noticed she was mute in pretty much all social settings. Today, Alex is currently in grad school and, in her own words, is more outgoing than both of her parents. In this episode, Dr. Reed and Alex discuss Alex's journey with SM, what worked during her treatment, advice she has for those still working to overcome SM, and much, much more. Before we get started, if you have any questions on anything you hear in today's episode between Dr. E and Alex, please head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask Dr. E, that's ASKDRE, and enter your question in the form. We read all of your submissions, and we do our best to answer them on podcast episodes, blog posts, and on social media. And speaking of social media, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram and on YouTube. We are at UnspokenWords_podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words Podcast by Dr. E on YouTube. All right, without further ado, please enjoy episode 48 of the Unspoken Words Podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. E. Before we get started with today's episode, I have something really exciting to share with you. On Friday, April 4th, 2025, we'll be hosting our all-day Selective Mutism in the School virtual conference offering 6.5 continuing education credits for professionals attending. We've put together an incredible lineup of selective mutism experts and will discuss the assessment, development of accommodations, interventions, and strategies to help the child and teen with selective mutism, social anxiety, and shyness speak in school. So mark your calendar, April 4th, and if you're a parent, be sure to share this opportunity with your child's school staff, doctor, therapist, so they too can attend. Registration details can be found on our website, www.selectivemutismcenter.org, and in the description of this podcast episode. Together, we can create a world where every child has a voice. Now, enjoy the episode. Hello, listeners. Welcome to our episode of Shining Stars on Unspoken Words. The reason we do this series of podcasts for our listeners is to offer you hope, to realize that you can indeed overcome SM and your child or teen can indeed overcome SM and reach their potential. So I am here today with Alex Collins. How are you, Alex?
I'm good. Hi, Dr. E. How are you?
I am so good. It is so great to see you.
I know, it feels good to be back on the podcast.
It does. It does. For our listeners, you may recognize Alex's voice. She was helping me out in the beginning of our podcast series when we first launched Unspoken Words, when I was going into so much detail about SCAT, what SCAT is, and so forth. So you are super busy now, Alex. I know that.
I am. I'm a lot busier these days, but it's good. It's good to be back.
It is good to be back, and we see you all the time at camp, but we'll go into that. So I'm excited. Part of the Shining Star process is filling out a questionnaire. And I have to say that when I read the questionnaire of the Shining Star, there you were, a picture of you when you were a little girl and you came to the Smart Center. And I remembered you then. I remembered you as a little girl. You were about 6, right?
Yeah, I think I was 6 going on 7, something like that.
Yeah, and I remember, and you look pretty much the same, just
Yes.
older. But I remember you, and I remember your mother bringing you to the Smart Center way back when. So that was many years ago, which only proves one, how old I am, and how much time has gone by, and how long I've been in this field. But it's wonderful to see you, to know you the way I know you, and you've come so far. So way back when, can you remember a bit about what you felt like way back when, 6, 7 years old?
Again, and it's interesting because I'm so far removed from that now. I'm fully an adult, but as something like an experience with selective mutism, it really sticks with you. So I have so many like distinct memories from back then and from going through that whole journey and overcoming it. So it's cool to reflect on that now.
Yeah, well, we're going to do that today a bit because sometimes I talk to adults who really don't remember much when they were younger. I don't know if they blocked it out or they just like have gone far, like different places in their life. And I think because you are so engrossed in the field now, that you probably, those memories have surfaced and stayed there because of your passion. So I can understand that. So tell us, when you were little, what do you remember way back when, even before you came to the Smart Center?
I remember definitely knowing from the time I started going to school that I was different from the rest of my peers. I was able to make one really close friend before I started school. So I was always fully verbal with her. But when I got to school, the anxiety kind of took over, and I realized very quickly that I wasn't like the other kids in the way that I just was not able to get my words out at all in the classroom, in the school setting ever. And really only at home was I able to do that. And I definitely remember thinking that that was just me, that was who I was, and I was never going to be any different because obviously I didn't have the language to know what selective mutism was, or that could ever even be a diagnosis.
And just for our listeners, one of the things that I'm very big about is understanding why someone developed SM, which is important because it may have been a factor into SM where learned behavior came about, but also what might be maintaining it for those that still struggle with social communication. And in your case, do you remember what your whys were?
Yes, I was very timid and I have always been a high anxiety presenting person. So those were my whys.
Right. So you didn't really have a lot with like speech and language or any sort of learning challenges, anything like that. You didn't have innate like social skill deficits. You were what I call almost like a dictionary. If there is a dictionary picture of SM, what most people see SM as are the highly sensitive, very timid individuals. And for those individuals like yourself, you get the right treatment and you build the social communication skills and confidence, and you can be fully verbal, engaging in society, and you're not really accommodating a why that might be holding you up a little, like it might be holding up some individuals where they need different type of approach to treatment. So I love talking to you because you're so articulate. You're always able to express that. So I remember meeting your mom, and I remember you driving kind of far, right?
Yep.
So you came to the Smart Center. Do you remember what some of the things were that we did back then that helped you?
The main thing, I don't remember much about being at the center. I remember the intake, and I remember going into the room with my parents and sitting on my mom's lap. And I remember you asked me to pick a crayon out of the box.
You remember this? You're
Yes,
amazing.
this is what I remember. And you asked me to do that, and I was like frozen. I couldn't move. I like was completely turned away from you. That's like my core memory from the Smart Center before, obviously before present day. But yeah, that's my main memory. And I know that because I'm the oldest of 5 kids, we didn't make it to the actual center a lot. But I know there was a lot of working with my parents behind the scenes and sort of giving them the knowledge and skills they needed and to then bring it to my school and work with everybody.
Yeah, a big part of working with you is working with your parents and working with the school and giving them recommendations and so forth. So a lot of the kids I work with or that are now teens and adults will kind of remember some of the experiences, but they didn't understand all the what was happening in the background. So
Right.
kind of fast forward, you found your voice, you found your friends. What do you remember what like helped you the most or things that really worked for you?
From what I remember, it was mainly just letting me move and gain that comfort at my own pace. I was able to speak to that one friend in the classroom. Slowly, I remember we decided to keep her in my classroom throughout second and third grade. And during those years, I was able to work on pairing me up with her and then moving me into smaller groups with some of her other friends in the classroom. And then by, I think, the end of third grade, I was verbal with everybody in my class. The only thing I struggled with at that point was speaking in front of the class. So I still wasn't able to give presentations or anything like that. But we worked on that throughout fourth and fifth grade. And then by the time I went to middle school, I would say I didn't meet the diagnostic criteria anymore.
Yeah, I remember I saw you for like a year or so. And then I think the rest was just your parents would call me kind of here and there. And you were doing so well. So that ended up, being amazing about how that worked and that buddy process, which you know a lot about, right?
Yes. Yes.
And we always say it's not just having buddies, it's what you do with the buddies, where you question them, how you question them, who do you include, how do you move a buddy in, how do you move a buddy out? And that's always based on kind of your presentation. So I do remember that, I do remember that being a big deal for you and wanting more friends. So I do remember kind of that being a big focus because I think you were able to talk to the teacher. It was more kind of getting you more comfortable with more of the kids, which was a challenge.
Yeah, and it was a lot of building that comfort with them for me. I know a lot of kids with SM end up moving schools or moving to a private school, but I think what ended up being very important for me was sticking with that same group of kids and getting to know that group better and moving through, in my case, elementary school with them.
Well, it's interesting you said that. I would say that not a lot of people move schools. It's really rare. Every now and then you have somebody move a school for either like they move or they do make a change, but I would say 95 to almost 99% don't because they don't have the ability to make a change with schools. So we do work within the school and, kind of work accommodations, interventions with the school, within the school as they move along through their schooling. So, one of the things that I would say is that you stuck with SM. What made you, so you have an interest in it, obviously, and we'll talk about what you're doing now. So share with us like your interest in SM and why you became so passionate about it.
Yeah, so I kind of throughout middle and high school didn't really think about it ever again because it wasn't an issue. I was never the first person to raise my hand in class, and I was still on the quieter side, but I was fine. I was thriving. And then I went to college, studied psychology, and for my senior capstone project, I decided to give it on selective mutism in the classroom. So as I was doing research for that project, I rediscovered the Smart Center and started using some of that research in my presentation. And that's actually how I found out about COMMUNICAMP, because when I had SM, obviously COMMUNICAMP didn't exist yet. So that's actually how I found out about that opportunity. Applied to be a counselor, and I loved it, and the rest is history.
Hey listeners, we'll get back to the episode in a second. I want to tell you about COMMUNICAMP, our popular 3+ day intensive group treatment and all-day parent education and support program designed to help parents, children, and teens overcome selective mutism, social anxiety, and extreme shyness. Over 3+ action-packed days, your child or teen will engage in immersive activities guided by expert clinicians that build confidence and communication skills in a supportive, fun, and collaborative environment. Spaces are limited and spots book up fast. To learn more, please find COMMUNICAMP in this episode's description or head to communicamp.org and complete our interest form, and our team will be in touch. Let's help your child or teen find their voice at COMMUNICAMP. Let's get back to the episode. Yeah, the rest is history. You are, at a lot of our camps, and now you are doing what? Tell our listeners what you're doing now.
Yeah, now I'm a doctoral student at Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, focusing on school psychology. So I'll have my PsyD in school psychology in a while, but I'm
Yes.
working
Well,
on
I know it's
it.
5 years, but you are amazing, and we love having you, and the kids love you, and you're often on our panels when the parents are asking questions. So, we love having you. You're just amazing. You're just amazing. So, like, tell me now, like, I know now, like, tell our listeners, you don't have any signs of obviously SM, but you did indicate at the beginning that you still struggle a bit with anxiety. Where would you say your anxiety kind of lies these days?
Yeah, it definitely ebbs and flows. Towards the end of undergrad, it was very academic related. I had really bad test anxiety, anxiety towards any sort of school assignment, which is part of the reason I didn't want to go to grad school right away. But I don't really have any of that social anxiety or anxiety towards public speaking or anything like that anymore.
Yeah, no, that's great. Some people have said with SM, well, does it transfer to something else? And the answer is no. But however, because it's an anxiety, many individuals with selective mutism, especially those that have kind of that innate anxiety, and it's often familial, it's often throughout a family, that tendency towards kind of generalized anxiety and worries and stuff like that. So we do see that. And of course, building the long-term coping skills, which clearly you have done and you coped through, and now you're in grad school accomplishing your dreams. So, we're all human. We all have moments of anxiety. We all have moments of depression. It's about how do we cope through these difficult times. It's unrealistic to say that when someone overcomes SM, they're never going to have any anxiety or worries or fears, or it's impossible because every human is prone to being nervous or anxious at times. We're human,
Right.
right? So I wanted our listeners to know that, because there are people that go, well, she'll never be anxious again. It's like, no, I can't guarantee that. It's just, how does she cope through those difficult times? So kudos to you for building those skills and still living out your dream. And, it's about functioning, and you clearly more than function in every aspect of your life, socially, emotionally, academically, communicatively. And here you are talking to our listeners. Who would have thought that, right? Who would have thunk it?
Right. Yes, exactly.
So tell me what, like, recommendations you have for families listening, parents that are listening as they're struggling and really not knowing what to do and how to do it. Like, what would you say your advice is to a parent?
Well, I think it's great that they've found the Smart Center. Honestly, it's such a great resource, and now they have access to all the facts and clinical information that they'll need. So, aside from that, I would say it's really important to focus on what they can do and what they're good at, and make sure they know that, because they're fully aware of what they can't do and what they're having a really hard time doing. So as a parent, just be there as their mom, as their dad, as their guardian, and give them that love and that comfort that they need, right? Because they need comfort somewhere. We're trying to build that comfort out, but give them that foundation and that nurture that they need to thrive elsewhere and have the confidence to overcome their SM.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is that if your child is feeling anxious or is avoidant, try not to fight them on that and push them beyond a comfort level, but respect them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
validate how they feel. And that will give them, a sense of security, right? Because that's what I know, the way your parents parenting you, and that was a huge help for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that's great advice. And I would say also, go with your gut. If it doesn't feel right with what you're hearing from past professionals or teachers, then it's probably not right. So go with your gut, because it should feel right with whatever you're doing. So that's important. So I know you've shared things like that in the past on panels. And I do think that's a good thought too, because sometimes parents, like, this doesn't feel right, but they're talking to somebody that might be more educated than them. And it's uncomfortable to kind of listen to something that just doesn't feel real right. Because your child the best, right? Like your mom and dad knew you the best. And you now the best.
Right. Yeah, I know I know you talk about with Sophie how so many people were making recommendations that just didn't add up to you and you knew weren't true about her. So also that advocacy piece, because you know your child the best.
Yeah, and I think what some parents struggle with is if your child is a bit different than you. Like, let's say one of your parents may have been more outgoing than you at the time, right? So it's hard to always relate to, why does my daughter or son feel
that way. It doesn't make sense. And you have to kind of remove yourself from that because your child is a different person than you. And what makes you nervous or anxious might be different than what makes your child nervous or anxious. And as easy as it is for a very outgoing, extroverted person with younger children, especially in the beginning, and then as kids age, they become more avoidant when they can't do things. So they start pulling back. So kind of just respect where your child is at, and that's definitely a first place to go. What types of recommendations or thoughts do you have for kids going through this? Say another 6 or 7-year-old when they're feeling a certain way. I know you work with kids at camp, right? That's like an 8. You work up to, what are the typical ages you work with at camp?
Usually I've dabbled in all ages, but I've been normally working with the 7 to 9-year-olds. And then sometimes the preteens are usually who I'm working with.
Yeah. And so what do you see among the kids when you're working with them? How they're feeling and how do you validate them?
Well, I think it's great when most of them come to camp just to even see them be in an environment where they all have the same issues. They're all struggling with the same things in their school and in their everyday lives. So I really like to emphasize that and have them, rely on each other and even look and see how different they each present. That was something that was really interesting for me coming in from only knowing my perspective and then seeing kids and teens who present completely differently but are dealing with the same thing. That was a really unique part of the experience for me.
Oh, wow. I love hearing that. And you're just validating the whole process that no two children are the same,
Yeah,
that
definitely.
individuals, right? And individuals just present differently. And the key is to understand them. What are some of the things, like I know you work at COMMUNICAMP. So as you see these kids go through the weekend, how do you see them change? And how does that relate to, I guess this is like, we didn't review these questions that I'm asking you. So I apologize about putting you on the spot, but I look at you handling them. But I'm just curious because I think it's interesting for our listeners. How do you see kids change throughout the weekend?
I think it's crazy, honestly, how fast they change. Kids will come in on day one super reserved and uncomfortable, understandably so, right? It's a new environment. They don't know anybody else there. But I think maybe even because they're in an environment of people who are going through similar things. And I usually share that I went through a similar experience as a kid as well when I was their age. They're able to build comfort so easily. So even taking the speech part out completely, their entire demeanor changes, just the way that they present as an individual. And that's one of the coolest parts for me.
Yeah. And how do they react to the bridge when you show them the bridge?
I think it's interesting how some of them are excited to share their bridge and some of them are a little more aware of how they, might be in stage 0 or 1 in more places than others, especially as they get older. But I think it's a really great opportunity for some of them to get more of an understanding of, oh, there's something to explain how I feel, and there's a way for me to move across it.
Yeah, it gives them a sense of control. Because I remember even when you were little, it's just a way to gain that control of knowing where I'm at and what I'm working towards. And if you have to bridge down at moments, it's okay. It doesn't make them feel like a failure. And then they learn the skills to be able to progress and be more consistent with the progression into speech. So, I love that you work with these kids and I love that you share that you've gone through this and I love that you're pursuing your education. It's just amazing. So no, this has been great. And are there any other like recommendations you have for our listeners? Is there anything you want to share? Have you learned about SM yet in grad school?
No, not yet. Still getting the basics down, but I hope we do. And if not, I will bring it up.
Yeah, and you may hear it described as kids that just don't speak, and that's when my blood curdles because we know that's a symptom.
Right.
And so we have to educate them that yes, not speaking is a symptom, but there's reasons why this child doesn't speak. And not only that, but where are they in their social communication to at least have a starting point of what to work on.
Definitely.
So yes, you have to educate them. Yeah. So anything else you want to share? Like, what is your lifelong aspiration? What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Not 5 years. You'll still, be going through a lot, but what do you see yourself doing in the next 7 years?
Yeah. Well, hopefully in 5, I'll have the degree. I don't know. I would like to, I think I would really like to make an impact in the school setting because I know how important that is and how it's important for kids with SM to make progress in that setting. So really want to just keep advocating for kids and teens and individuals. And I guess to wrap it up, I would just say that I remember feeling like I would really never be able to speak. I remember thinking I would have to write book reports forever because there was no way I was ever going to be able to overcome it. And I know that there are a lot of kids and teens right now who are thinking that same way. But I think it's even helpful just to hear somebody who used to not be able to talk at all outside of the house, speaking fully in every environment.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, honestly, you're giving so many people such hope, and that's why we do this, because for this reason, we don't want them to feel hopeless and become depressed and swim in their diagnosis and think this is who I am. And you are testimonial that look at you. You're living your life, right?
Yeah, it's great. I'm so happy I can make a difference in this area.
No, you absolutely can. You absolutely can. So this is amazing, and I thank you for being on Unspoken Words today and sharing your story. And our listeners, I'm sure, appreciate it. And I'm hoping if, some of the listeners have older children, teens, to listen to this episode to realize this is what you can do. And hopefully people are gaining that confidence in this process and realize that they can indeed find their voice. So thank you so much, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Dr. E. I'll see you at COMMUNICAMP.
Thank you for listening to Unspoken Words, a selective mutism podcast hosted by me, Dr. E, and the Smart Center. This episode and all episodes of Unspoken Words is produced by New Edition Productions. Don't forget to submit any questions you have from today's episode using our Ask Dr. E form on our website. Just head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask DRE. I'd love to answer your question in a future episode or blog post. Remember, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, please follow the podcast on Instagram and YouTube. We are at unspokenwords_podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words by DRE on YouTube. Or join our newsletter for additional SM content. We release new episodes every other Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next time.